The laugh was the first thing that truly cut through the polite hum of the Metropolitan Legacy Gala. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was a weapon, sharp, cruel, and aimed directly at the woman sitting silently at the most prominent table in the ballroom. That woman was Anya Sterling. The man beside her, her husband, was Richard Sterling, a titan of industry. And the woman, laughing, draped over him like a victory banner, was his mistress, Ivana Vance. In that moment, Anya looked like the most humiliated woman in the world. But what nobody in that room knew was that the entire glittering affair, the very foundation their world was built on, belonged to her, and she was about to take it all back. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a universe unto itself. A constellation of diamond chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over a sea of black tie and couture. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, vibrated with the low murmur of 1,000 conversations about stock prices, art acquisitions, and summer plans in the Hamptons. This was the annual Metropolitan Legacy Gala, the undisputed pinnacle of New York's philanthropic calendar, where the city's old money and new power collided in a dazzling display of wealth and influence. At the center of this universe, at table 1, sat Richard Sterling. He was not a man who occupied a room. He conquered it. With a jawline that seemed carved from granite and eyes the color of cold steel, he possessed a gravitational pull that drew people in. His company, Sterling Industries, had revolutionized global logistics, making him a billionaire before his 40th birthday. He was the king of this gilded world, and he wore his crown with an easy, almost contemptuous arrogance. To his left sat his wife, Anya Sterling. To the casual observer, she was a perfect accessory. Elegant and poised with raven-black hair, pulled into a severe but graceful chignon, and wearing a simple midnight blue gown that screamed bespoke quality without shouting for attention. She was quiet, her gaze often distant, a stark contrast to her husband's boisterous charisma. The society pages called her the Sterling Enigma, a beautiful but reserved figure who seemed to float at the edge of her husband's brilliant light. They saw her as a relic of a bygone era, a trophy from a strategic marriage he'd made years ago to solidify his social standing. To Richard's right, however, was the evening's real spectacle, Ivana Vance. Ivana was everything Anya was not. She was faux and noise, a supernova of ambition, clad in a shimmering, scandalously scarlet dress. A model-turned-influencer with millions of followers, she clung to Richard's arm with a possessive ferocity. She laughed too loudly, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that barely concealed its venom. She touched his arm, his shoulder, his hand, with a theatrical intimacy that was a calculated insult to the woman sitting just inches away. The arrangement was a brazen declaration. For months, the affair had been the subject of hushed whispers and blind items in gossip columns. Tonight, Richard wasn't just confirming the rumors. He was celebrating them. He was parading his mistress in front of the world, in front of his wife, as if to say, "See what I can do. I am bound by no rules." Anya remained a statue of composure. She sipped her water, her expression unreadable. She had long grown accustomed to the chill in her marriage, the emotional abyss that had opened between them. But this public performance was a new, deeper level of cruelty. She could feel the stares pitying from some, gleeful from others. She could hear the whispers from the adjacent tables. "Can you believe the audacity?" A woman with a face tight from surgery murmured to her companion. "To bring her here and sit her at the main table. Poor Anya," the other replied, though her eyes danced with schadenfreude. "She looks like a ghost." Richard leaned over and whispered something in Ivana's ear, his lips brushing against her diamond earring. Ivana let out another peal of laughter, this one even louder, more triumphant. She glanced directly at Anya, her eyes glittering with a victor's malice. "Oh, Richard, you're wicked," Ivana purred loud enough for Anya and half the table to hear. "You were just telling me about your new yacht. Is it true you're naming it the Ivana?" Richard smirked, a predator enjoying his kill. "Only the best for the best." He didn't even look at his wife. It was as if she were a piece of furniture, an inconvenient part of the decor. The moment felt like a physical blow to Anya. Not the affair itself that was an old, dull ache. It was the sheer, unadulterated disrespect. The deliberate act of erasing her in a room where her presence was by all rights a given. He was making a statement the old was being replaced by the new. The quiet, dignified wife was being usurped by the loud, flashy mistress. Damien Blackwood, a man of old money steel, and the CEO of a rival conglomerate, sat across the table. He was one of the few people in the room who genuinely respected Anya. His gaze met hers, a question in his dark, discerning eyes. "Are you all right?" Anya gave him the faintest, almost imperceptible nod. It was a signal he had come to understand over the years. "I am fine. Just watch." The final act of the charade began, when Richard stood up, clinking his crystal glass with a fork. The room quieted, all eyes turning to him. He was one of the gala's primary sponsors, and a speech was expected. "Thank you all for coming." He began, his voice smooth and commanding. "It's wonderful to see so many generous hearts in one room, supporting the future of our great city." He went through the platitudes, the practiced charm flowing effortlessly. Then his eyes found Ivana's. "But as we look to the future," he continued, a sly smile playing on his lips, "we must also celebrate the present. The vibrant, bold, and beautiful forces that inspire us to reach for more." He raised his glass, not to the charity, not to the guests, but directly to Ivana. "To new beginnings." The implication was as subtle as a guillotine. A collective gasp, quickly suppressed, rippled through the ballroom. It was a public divorce announcement without the paperwork. It was the ultimate humiliation. And as the room swam in a shocked, delicious silence, Ivana Vance leaned back in her chair, looked straight at the woman her lover was discarding, and let out the laugh that would change everything. The laugh was not a sound of amusement. It was a declaration of victory, a high, piercing note of triumph that sliced through the stunned atmosphere of the ballroom. It was a sound designed to break the spirit of the woman seated opposite her. For a moment, it seemed to work. Anya Sterling's posture, which had been ramrod straight, seemed to subtly fold inward, as if absorbing the full force of the blow. Her gaze dropped from Richard's smirking face to the untouched crème brûlée on her plate. To everyone watching, this was the moment of her defeat. The quiet, dignified wife had finally been broken by the brazen, beautiful mistress. They saw a woman, shattered, publicly shamed, with no recourse but to endure the indignity in silence. Richard certainly saw it that way. He gave Ivana's shoulder a triumphant squeeze, his expression a mixture of pride and pity for the woman he had so thoroughly conquered. But beneath the placid surface, Anya was not breaking. She was focusing. The laughter, the stares, the whispers. They were not arrows piercing her heart. They were simply data points, final confirmations of a conclusion she had reached long ago. For years she had lived in a state of suspended animation, playing the part of the dutiful wife Richard thought he had married. She had hosted his dinners, charmed his business partners, and maintained the elegant facade of their life, all while he grew more distant, more arrogant, more careless. She had stayed not out of weakness, but out of strategy. A promise made to her dying father was the anchor of her silence. Her father, Konstantin Volkov, had been a man of immense but quiet wealth, a connoisseur of art and history, who loathed the garish spectacle of the new money. He had built his fortune over generations, not in the volatile world of tech startups, but in stable foundational assets, land art, and rare commodities. He had distrusted Richard from the beginning. This man, Anya, Konstantin had told her on his deathbed, his voice a papery whisper. He does not see you. He sees a name, a legacy he can acquire. He will use it, and when he thinks he has drained it of its value, he will try to discard you. He had made her promise one thing. Do not let him shatter what our family built. Before you act, let him show the world exactly who he is. Give him enough rope, and his own arrogance will build his gallows. For 5 years, Anya had honored that promise. She had given Richard the rope, and tonight he had finally finished building his gallows, complete with a public viewing. It is time, a voice in her head, calm and clear, as a ringing bell announced. Her gaze lifted from her plate. It swept past Ivana, who was still preening under the attention, and past Richard, who was accepting condescending pats on the back from his sycophants. Her eyes found Damien Blackwood again. This time, there was no question in her look. It was a command. Now. Damien, who had been watching the scene with a thunderous expression, understood immediately. He had been a friend of the Volkov family long before Anya had become Mrs. Sterling. He was one of only 3 people in the world who knew the full, staggering truth of her identity. He gave a single sharp nod, his jaw set. He subtly took out his phone beneath the table and sent a pre-written text message, "Initiate." Anya took a slow, deliberate sip of water. The cold liquid was grounding. She placed the glass back on the table with a soft click that seemed in her own mind to be the sound of a starting gun. She felt a strange serenity descend upon her, the calm that comes when a long-awaited, inevitable battle is about to begin. The humiliation was a fire, but it wasn't consuming her. It was forging her. The pain was real, but it was being transmuted into fuel. She thought of the years of quiet work, the late nights spent in her private study, a place Richard never entered, dismissing it as where she dabbled in her little hobbies. Her little hobby was managing the Elysian Trust, the largest and most enigmatic philanthropic foundation in the world. It was her creation, funded entirely by the Volkov family fortune, a legacy she had not just preserved but multiplied 100-fold. Its endowment was so vast it dwarfed the GDP of small nations. Its influence was legendary. The trust was famously anonymous. Its founder and sole benefactor was known to the world only as the benefactor, a mysterious figure who moved mountains with a pen stroke but had never been seen or identified. The grants from the Elysian Trust had funded the new wing of the very museum. Hosting the gala had endowed professorships at every Ivy League university, had financed breakthrough medical research, and had saved countless orchestras and theaters from bankruptcy. Everyone in this room had in some way benefited from or desperately craved the favor of the Elysian Trust. They spoke of the benefactor with a reverence usually reserved for deities, and Richard, in his infinite arrogance, had never once made the connection. He saw his wife's family money as a quaint, dusty old fortune he had absorbed into his own dynamic empire. He had no idea that his own wealth was a flickering candle next to her blazing sun. He had no idea that the silent, passive woman beside him held the power to create and destroy legacies with a single decision. Anya placed her napkin neatly beside her plate. She pushed her chair back, the sound scraping softly against the marble floor. The movement was so unexpected that it drew a few curious glances. Richard, annoyed by the interruption to his moment of glory, looked at her with irritation. "What are you doing, Anya? Don't make a scene." Anya didn't answer him. She stood up, her spine straight, her head held high. The midnight blue dress, which had seemed so understated before, now looked like a robe of judgment. For the first time all evening, she was no longer a shadow. She was a presence, and she started to walk. Not away from the table in defeat, not towards the exit in a flood of tears, but directly, purposefully, towards the stage. As Anya began to walk, a new wave of whispers washed over the ballroom. This was a deviation from the script everyone had imagined. A humiliated wife was supposed to shrink, to disappear. She was supposed to endure the pain with quiet tears, or flee the scene, providing more fodder for the gossip mills. She was not supposed to walk toward the center of power. Richard's irritation morphed into confusion, then a flash of anger. This was his night. He had orchestrated it perfectly to announce his new life with Ivana and cement his status as a man who takes what he wants. Anya's silent, graceful exit was meant to be the final, pathetic grace note of his triumph. "Anya, sit down," he hissed, his voice a low command meant only for her. She ignored him, her pace steady and unhurried. Each step was measured silent on the plush carpet. Her focus was singular, the brightly lit stage at the front of the room. Ivana watched her go, a smirk of pure contempt on her face. She leaned towards Richard, her voice a stage whisper designed to carry. "Oh dear, I think someone needs her smelling salts. Is she going to faint? Or maybe she's going to make a pathetic little speech about the sanctity of marriage." She let out another laugh, but this one was different. It was laced with a sliver of uncertainty. The utter lack of fear or sadness in Anya's demeanor was unnerving. It was like watching a chess piece move itself when you were certain the game was already over. The gala's host, a well-known television personality named Jean Dubois, was still on stage preparing to introduce the next segment of the evening, a live auction. He saw Anya approaching and a look of professional panic crossed his face. An unscheduled interruption by a publicly cuckolded wife was a social event manager's worst nightmare. He discreetly signaled for a security guard to intercept her. But before the guard could move, something else happened. Damien Blackwood rose from his seat at table 1. He was a tall, imposing figure, a man whose family name was woven into the very fabric of New York City. Unlike Richard's brash, newly minted power, Damien's was old, deep, and unshakable. He commanded respect without ever having to demand it. As Anya passed his chair, Damien did something that sent a jolt of confusion through the room. He inclined his head, not in a simple nod, but in a formal, deliberate bow. It was a gesture of profound respect, the kind one might offer to a monarch or a head of state. The act was so stark, so out of place, that it stopped the whispers cold. People stared, trying to process what they had just seen. Why would Damien Blackwood, a titan of industry in his own right, bow to the humiliated wife of his rival? A few tables away, Beatrice Vanderbilt, the formidable 80-year-old matriarch of one of America's founding families, watched the scene unfold through her lorgnette. She had known Anya's family for decades. A slow, knowing smile spread across her wrinkled face. She tapped the shoulder of her grandson. "Get up," she commanded, in a voice that brooked no argument. He did. As Anya passed their table, Beatrice also inclined her head, a queen acknowledging another. A domino effect began slow at first, then rapidly gaining momentum. Others who knew the Volkov legacy, who understood that there was more to Anya Sterling than her husband's shadow, began to rise. They were the old guard, the quiet power brokers who dealt in legacies, not fleeting headlines. An ambassador, a federal judge, a world-renowned surgeon whose research hospital had been a recipient of a mysterious 9-figure anonymous grant a few years prior. One by one, they stood and bowed their heads as Anya passed. The atmosphere in the room was undergoing a seismic shift. The smug certainty was dissolving into a pool of bewilderment. The air crackled with unspoken questions. What was happening? What did they know that everyone else didn't? Richard watched his face, a mask of disbelief. He looked at Damien, then at Beatrice Vanderbilt, his mind struggling to compute the scene. These were not his people. They were the establishment he had always sneered at, but secretly craved acceptance from. And they were paying homage to his wife, his meek, unassuming, irrelevant wife. Ivana's smug smile had frozen, then curdled. The triumphant laughter died in her throat. This was not part of the fantasy. Her victory was supposed to be absolute. She was the vibrant, desired future. Anya was the discarded past, but the past was now walking through a corridor of silent, bowing titans, and the future was suddenly feeling very small and very cheap. "What is this?" she whispered to Richard, her voice tight with panic. "What are they doing? Is this some kind of sick joke?" Richard didn't answer. A cold knot of dread was tightening in his stomach. He had always operated on the assumption that he was the most important person in any room he entered. For the first time, he was confronted with the terrifying possibility that he had fundamentally miscalculated the balance of power in his own marriage. He had seen Anya as a beautiful empty vessel he had filled with his name and status. The idea that she might contain a universe of her own was so alien it defied comprehension. By the time Anya reached the small set of stairs leading to the stage, nearly a third of the room was on its feet. Their heads bowed in a silent, stunning tribute. The security guard, who had been sent to intercept her, now stood frozen, looking to his panicked boss for guidance. Jean Dubois, the host, was sweating under the hot stage lights. He looked from the approaching Anya to his teleprompter, his script now utterly useless. He was a man paid to be in control, and he had lost it completely. Anya ascended the steps with the same unhurried grace she had shown all evening. She walked to the center of the stage, stopping beside the ornate lectern. She didn't grab the microphone or demand attention. She simply stood there, bathed in the spotlight, and waited. The remaining whispers in the ballroom died out. The silence that fell was absolute, heavy with tension and 1,000 unanswered questions. Every eye was fixed on the woman in the midnight blue dress. The Sterling enigma was about to speak, and in that moment, Richard Sterling finally understood the words of his late father-in-law. He had been given the rope, and the noose was now tightening around his neck. On the stage, Anya stood in the pool of light, a solitary, resolute figure. For a long moment, she did not speak. She simply surveyed the room, her gaze sweeping over the sea of stunned faces. She saw the confusion, the dawning curiosity, and on the faces of Richard and Ivana, a burgeoning terror. The power in the room, once so firmly centered on her husband's table, had shifted entirely. It now emanated from her. Jean Dubois. The host finally broke from his paralysis. He scurried over to her, his professional smile looking more like a pained grimace. "Mrs. Sterling," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "This is, an unscheduled part of our program. Is there something I can help you with?" Anya turned her head to look at him, her expression calm but unyielding. "You can introduce me, Mr. Dubois, but you will use my real name." Dubois blinked, utterly baffled. "Your real name I don't understand." From the floor, Damien Blackwood's voice, deep and resonant, cut through the silence. "Her name is Anya Volkov." The name landed like a stone in a still pond. Volkov. It wasn't an unknown name, but it was one associated with a level of discreet, almost mythical wealth that made tech billionaires like Richard Sterling look like lottery winners. The Volkovs did not grace the covers of magazines. They did not build glass towers with their names on them. They endowed museums, owned vast tracts of land, and possessed art collections that were the secret envy of national galleries. They were the foundation, the bedrock upon which much of this glittering world was built. And they were famously intensely private. Dubois's eyes widened in comprehension. His face, which had been pale with panic, now flushed with a new, more profound kind of fear. The fear of having made a catastrophic social blunder. He looked at the sheet in his hand, the one that listed the evening's key patrons. At the very top above Richard Sterling's name was the primary underwriter of the entire gala, the Elysian Trust. And below it, in parenthesis, a note from the gala's chairwoman: "The benefactor may be in attendance. Extend every possible courtesy. Identity is strictly confidential." The pieces clicked into place in his mind with the force of a tectonic shift. He looked at Anya, then at the note, and back at Anya. The blood drained from his face. He turned back to the microphone, his hands shaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Forgive me. A most grievous oversight on my part." He cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "We are graced this evening with a presence of unparalleled importance. It is my profound and humbling honor to introduce the woman responsible not only for the success of this gala, but for the very existence of the new pediatric wing at Metropolitan Hospital, the Volkov wing at the Met, and countless other institutions that define our city." He took a deep breath, his voice filled with an awe that was entirely genuine. "Please show your respect for the founder and sole benefactor of the Elysian Trust, Ms. Anya Volkov." If Damien Blackwood's bow had been a tremor, this announcement was the earthquake. A collective audible gasp swept the ballroom. It was a sound of shock, of disbelief, and of sudden blinding enlightenment. The Sterling enigma, the anonymous benefactor. They were one and the same. The quiet, overlooked wife was the single most powerful philanthropic force on the planet. Now the bowing made sense. Now the deference from the old guard was clear. They weren't just respecting the wife of a powerful man. They were paying tribute to their queen. The rest of the room, the ones who had been whispering and sneering, scrambled to their feet. The sound was a frantic rustle of silk and wool as hundreds of people rose in unison, their heads dipping in a wave of hasty, desperate reverence. They were bowing to the woman who held the keys to their legacies, their pet projects, their social survival. The woman they had been pitying moments before was now the arbiter of their ambitions. At table 1, Richard Sterling remained seated, frozen in his chair. It was as if his muscles had turned to stone. Anya Volkov, the Elysian Trust. The words echoed in the cavern of his mind, dismantling his reality piece by piece. All those years he had sneered at her little charity work, her quiet management of what he thought was a modest family portfolio. He had seen himself as the titan, the builder, the one with real power. He had believed he was the sun, and she was a pale moon reflecting his light. He was wrong. He had been a court jester performing for a silent empress. His gaze fell upon Ivana. Her face was a canvas of horror. The color had drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, terrified mask. The scarlet dress that had seemed so bold and defiant now looked cheap and gaudy. She looked at Anya on the stage, then at the bowing crowd, and a terrifying understanding dawned in her eyes. She hadn't just picked a fight with a scorned wife. She had publicly mocked a god. Anya stepped forward to the microphone. She didn't tap it or clear her throat. She simply began to speak her voice, as calm and clear as it had been in her own mind just a short while ago. It was not the voice of a woman scorned, but of a CEO delivering a final unappealable verdict. "Thank you, Mr. Dubois." She began, her words amplified throughout the silent hall. "And thank you all for your warm welcome. For many years I have chosen to conduct my work privately. I believe philanthropy should be about the cause, not the individual." Her eyes scanned the room, and for the first time they locked directly onto Richard's. There was no fire in her gaze, no hatred. There was something far more terrifying indifference. "I founded the Elysian Trust on a single principle inherited from my father, that true strength is not loud but enduring. It is about building legacies that last, not chasing headlines that fade." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Every word was a dagger aimed at the core of Richard's entire existence. "However," she continued, her voice hardening almost imperceptibly, "it has become clear to me that in my desire for privacy, I have allowed certain misinterpretations to fester. Misinterpretations about where the true foundation of power lies in my own home." The room held its breath. This was no longer just a revelation. It was a reckoning. Anya's gaze remained fixed on her husband. The spotlight isolated them, creating a private stage for a public execution. Richard felt as though he were pinned by an entomologist's needle, a specimen of hubris to be studied and dissected. He couldn't look away. "My husband, Richard Sterling," Anya said, and the name, once a symbol of power, now sounded like a formal indictment, "has always been a man of immense ambition. He is skilled at acquisitions, at seeing value and taking it." She let a beat of silence pass, a silence so profound one could hear the frantic beating of Ivana's heart. "It seems his appetites have extended beyond the boardroom." A wave of nervous, suppressed coughs rippled through the audience. This was more direct, more brutal than anyone could have imagined. Anya was not just revealing her power, she was using it like a finely honed weapon. A partnership, whether in business or in marriage, must be built on a foundation of mutual respect. She continued, her voice level and devoid of emotion. "When that foundation is publicly eroded, when it is treated with contempt, then the partnership is rendered void. Its terms are null." She turned her attention from Richard, a silent dismissal that was more damning than any insult, and addressed the room at large. "The Elysian Trust has always operated independently of my husband's company, Sterling Industries. However, due to our marital connection, there has been an implicit association, an assumption of a shared ethos, an assumption that I must now formally correct." Her eyes found the chairman of the gala, a man named Marcus Thorne, who looked as if he was about to have a coronary. "Mr. Thorne, effective immediately, The Elysian Trust will be severing all formal and informal ties with Richard Sterling and any entity under the umbrella of Sterling Industries. The gasp this time was not of surprise, but of pure shock. It was a death sentence delivered in the calmest of tones. Sterling Industries sponsored dozens of initiatives, many of which were deeply intertwined with projects funded by the Elysian Trust. To be blacklisted by the Trust was not just a social slight, it was a financial catastrophe. It was a bright red flag to the entire world of finance and philanthropy. This man is toxic. Furthermore, Anya went on, her voice as sharp as breaking glass. The Trust will be initiating a full review of all joint sponsorship projects currently underway. We must ensure that our partners align with our core values of integrity, humility, and respect. Those found lacking will have their funding re-evaluated. It was a masterstroke. She wasn't just cutting Richard off. She was forcing everyone in that room, everyone who had ever taken $1 from her or him, to choose a side. And she had already made it abundantly clear which side held all the power. People who had been clapping Richard on the back an hour ago now subtly edged their chairs away from table 1 as if it were contaminated. Richard finally broke. He pushed himself to his feet, his face a mottled mask of rage and disbelief. "Anya!" he bellowed, his voice raw. "You can't do this. This is our life. I built this." The room flinched at his outburst. He looked like a cornered animal, all bluster and desperation. Anya looked at him, and for the first time a flicker of emotion crossed her face. It was not anger or pain. It was pity. "No, Richard," she said, her voice softening but losing none of its steel. "You didn't build this. You were a guest in it, and your visit is now over." She then did something that sealed his fate forever. She smiled a small, sad smile. "I wish you the best of luck in your new beginnings." She had taken his own words, the ones he had used to toast his mistress and humiliate his wife, and turned them into his epitaph. Her speech was over. She gave a slight regal nod to the stunned audience. The ballroom erupted not in polite applause, but in a thunderous, sustained ovation. It was a roar of approval, of relief, of fawning admiration for the Queen, who had so decisively vanquished her unworthy consort. They were applauding her power, her grace, and her glorious, cold-blooded revenge. As Anya walked off the stage, she was immediately enveloped by a crowd of people, the same people who had been studiously ignoring her an hour earlier. Damien Blackwood was the first to reach her, taking her hand. "Constantine would be proud," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Thank you, Damien," she replied, her composure unwavering. "For everything." She looked over the heads of the adoring crowd to table 1. It was an island of desolation in a sea of celebration. Richard stood there, utterly alone. His fists clenched, his face a portrait of impotent fury. And Ivana was gone. In the chaos of the standing ovation, she had slipped away, a ghost in a scarlet dress, her dreams of glory and a sterling fortune turned to ash. Her triumphant laugh would now be remembered only as the prelude to her own spectacular public immolation. Anya had not just defeated her rival, she had erased her. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. As Anya was being swarmed by a newly formed court of sycophants, each one desperate to catch her eye and pledge their undying allegiance, Richard Sterling remained standing at his table, a man marooned on a rapidly shrinking island. The applause for his wife was like the roar of a tidal wave about to crash down on him. His phone began to vibrate incessantly in his pocket. He pulled it out. his hand trembling with rage. The screen was a waterfall of notifications. News alerts from the major financial outlets, already breaking the story. Text messages from his board members, a frantic staccato of question marks and demands for an explanation. An email from his chief legal officer, with the subject line, "Urgent Elysian Trust." He looked up from his phone, his eyes scanning the room for an ally, a friendly face, anyone who wasn't looking at him with a mixture of fear and contempt. He found no one. The men who had been seeking his business advice earlier in the evening now studied their wine glasses as if they contained the secrets of the universe. The women who had admired his power now whispered behind their hands, their eyes darting towards him and then quickly away. He was radioactive. The host, Jean Dubois, still on stage, was trying to salvage the evening. "Well," he said with forced cheerfulness, "an unexpected but truly inspiring moment. Let's have another round of applause for the incredible generosity of Miss Anya Volkov." The applause was even louder this time. Anya, with Damien at her side, began a slow procession out of the ballroom, not as a fleeing victim, but as a triumphant monarch leaving the court. A path parted for her as she walked, people literally stumbling over themselves to get out of her way, or to offer a fawning compliment. Richard watched her go, a primal scream of frustration trapped in his throat. He had been so close. He had orchestrated his life with meticulous, ruthless precision. He had acquired the right company, the right homes, the right wife. He had believed he was the master of his universe. Now he saw that his entire world had been a stage, and he had been a fool, playing a king, never realizing the quiet stage manager owned the theater, the script and the actors. His fury needing a target settled on the empty chair beside him. Ivana. She had abandoned him at the first sign of trouble. The bold, vibrant future he had toasted had evaporated into a cowardly puff of smoke. His humiliation was now complete. He had lost his wife, his power, and his mistress in the span of 10 minutes. He finally moved, shoving his chair back with a loud scrape. He stormed towards the exit, ignoring the stares and the whispers that followed him like a cloud of wasps. He needed to find Anya to talk to her, to fix this. He could be persuasive. He could apologize. He could threaten. He had to do something. He burst through the ballroom doors into the grand hallway. He saw her near the main entrance, speaking quietly with the hotel's general manager. Damien Blackwood stood beside her like a royal guard. "Anya." Richard's voice was a ragged bark. Anya finished her sentence to the manager before turning to face him. Her expression was placid, as if she were addressing a stranger who had asked for directions. "Richard." She acknowledged her tone flat. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice low and seething. "You can't just blow up our lives on a whim. We had a deal. We had a marriage." Anya tilted her head slightly. "A marriage, Richard. I believe what we had was a business arrangement that has reached the end of its term. You breached the contract, specifically the clause on public decorum. This is not business. This is my life. My company," he snarled. "Your company's stock is down 9% in after-hours trading." Damien interjected smoothly, glancing at his phone. "And the board of Sterling Industries has just called an emergency meeting for 8 a.m. tomorrow. It seems your partners are as concerned about core values as Anya is." Richard's face went white. The hit was not just social, it was immediate and financial. "I will fight you," he whispered, his voice shaking with a rage that was quickly being replaced by fear. "I will take you for every penny. The divorce will be a war." Anya almost smiled. "Richard, please, do you really want to go through a discovery process? Do you want my lawyers, the best lawyers the Elysian Trust can buy, to comb through every detail of your life, your business dealings, your indiscretions?" She let the question hang in the air, a final devastating threat. "You came into this marriage with a promising tech company. You will leave with a generous severance. Do not make the mistake of thinking you are entitled to anything more." She then delivered the final, most exquisite cut. "Oh, and Richard," she said, her voice now laced with a chilling sweetness, "about the prenuptial agreement, I suggest you read the fine print. My father was a very thorough man. He insisted on a public humiliation clause. It appears your little performance tonight has rendered the entire agreement in your disfavor. You get nothing from my estate. Absolutely nothing." Richard stared at her, his mouth agape. He had signed that document without a second thought, his own high-priced lawyers assuring him it was standard. He had never imagined a scenario where he would be the one publicly humiliated. Anya gave a final nod, a gesture of complete and utter dismissal. "Good night, Richard." She turned, and with Damien at her side, walked towards the grand exit where a sleek black car, not one of Richard's flashy sports cars, but an elegant, understated Bentley, was waiting for her. The doorman, who had earlier seen her as just Mrs. Sterling, now bowed so low his head nearly touched his knees. Richard was left standing alone in the grand hallway of the plaza, the distant sound of the gala's orchestra, a mocking soundtrack to the utter implosion of his life. He had played his hand, certain he held a royal flush, only to find out his wife owned the entire casino. The cool night air of Manhattan was a balm after the suffocating atmosphere of the gala. As the Bentley glided silently into the city traffic, Anya leaned her head back against the soft leather and closed her eyes for the first time all evening. The tension that had held her ramrod straight for years finally began to recede, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion, but also of liberation. It was over. "Are you all right?" Damien asked from beside her, his voice gentle. Anya opened her eyes and turned to look at him, a genuine smile finally reaching her lips. "I'm better than all right, Damien. I'm free." The weight of the promise she had made to her father was lifted. She had done as he asked. She had given Richard the rope, and he had performed his part perfectly. There was no sadness for the end of her marriage. That had died years ago. There was only the clean, crisp feeling of a slate wiped clean. "His downfall will be spectacular," Damien said, not with glee, but as a statement of fact. "By noon tomorrow, he'll be a pariah. The board will oust him by the end of the week. No one will want to touch a company so publicly scorned by the Elysian Trust." "He made his choices," Anya said simply. She felt no need to revel in his destruction. Her actions hadn't been about revenge, not truly. They had been about restoration, restoring her name, her family's legacy, and her own sense of self, which she had so carefully shielded and compartmentalized for the sake of a long-term strategy. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her head of security. Ms. Vance attempted to re-enter the hotel via a service entrance. She was escorted off the premises. Anya read the message without comment. Ivana was a footnote, a catalyst who had mistaken herself for a main character. She would fade back into the obscurity of her filtered, sponsored world, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties for a few months before being forgotten entirely. The car pulled up to a discreet, elegant brownstone in the West Village, a property Richard had never known she owned. It was her sanctuary, her true home, filled with her father's art and books. "Will you be okay?" Damien asked as the driver opened her door. "I have a foundation to run, Damien," she said, her eyes alight with a renewed sense of purpose. "I have hospitals to fund and scholarships to grant. I have a world to change. I'll be busier than ever." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for being a true friend. Always Anya, to the Queen." She stepped out of the car and walked up the steps to her front door. Inside, she shed her shoes, the midnight blue gown, and the persona of Anya Sterling. She was Anya Volkov again, fully and completely. She walked to the large bay window in her library, which overlooked a quiet, moonlit garden. She thought of Richard not with anger, but with a clinical detachment. He was a man who saw the world as a series of assets to be acquired. He had seen her as his most valuable acquisition, the one that gave him the class and legacy his new money couldn't buy. His fatal flaw was in never understanding that some things cannot be owned. He had tried to put a queen in a gilded cage, never realizing she held the key all along. The city glittered outside her window, a vast expanse of light and ambition. For years she had moved through it as a ghost. Tonight she had reclaimed her city, her name, and her life. The world would wake up to a different reality tomorrow, one where Richard Sterling was a fallen star, and Anya Volkov was the quiet, immense gravity that had pulled him from the sky. And for the first time in a very long time, as she looked out at the dawn that was still hours away, she felt a profound and exhilarating sense of peace. The future was hers to build. The sun that rose over Manhattan the next morning was indifferent, casting its brilliant, impartial light on the victors and the vanquished alike. In a sterile, glass-walled penthouse overlooking Central Park, the light was an accusation. It illuminated dust motes dancing in the air and reflected off the cold, hard surfaces of a life that had overnight become a museum of failure. Richard Sterling had not slept. He sat at a massive marble dining table, still in the wrinkled tuxedo from the night before, a single glass of untouched whiskey, sweating beside his hand. The silence in the cavernous apartment was absolute. For years, this home had been a hub of activity. The constant pinging of his phone, the hum of servants, the echo of his own commanding voice. Now the silence was a living entity mocking him. His initial fury had burned itself out, leaving behind the cold, heavy ash of dread. He had spent the pre-dawn hours in a frantic, desperate attempt to seize back control. The calls had been a series of slamming doors. His personal lawyer, a man who had made millions off Richard's aggressive acquisition strategies, was suddenly speaking in cautious, measured tones. The humiliation clause. "Richard!" "It's ironclad," Barry had said, his voice strained. We all thought it was a quaint, archaic piece of posturing from the old man. No one ever imagined. Well, no one imagined this. Any legal challenge would be a long, public, and excruciatingly expensive process. And frankly, given the circumstances, your chances are slim. His PR chief, a shark named Tara, who had once spun a hostile takeover into a story of corporate heroism, was even more blunt. "There's no narrative here, Richard. You publicly flaunted your mistress and tried to discard your wife, who then turned out to be the anonymous saint of New York City. You're not the villain in this story. You're the punchline. My advice, go dark, completely dark, for at least a year. Go dark." The very concept was alien to him. His entire identity was built on being seen, on being the center of attention, the name on everyone's lips. To disappear was to cease to exist. The most chilling call had been to his longtime mentor and Sterling Industries' lead board member, Julian Croft. Julian's voice, usually a warm baritone, was clipped and cold as Arctic ice. "The meeting is at 8, Richard. Be here. That's all I have to say." He had hung up before Richard could even begin to plead his case. He stared out the window at the city that had once been his kingdom. He saw it all so clearly now, a picture brought into focus by the brutal clarity of ruin. He had always seen Anya's background as a tool, a key to unlock the doors of the establishment that his new money couldn't pry open. He had married a legacy, possessed it, and in his mind absorbed it. He never once considered that the legacy was not a passive inheritance, but a living, breathing entity of immense power that he had merely been allowed to stand next to. His phone buzzed on the table. A news alert. Sterling Industries SI stock plummets in pre-market trading following gala revelations. CEO's future in question. He swiped it away, the motion sluggish. The empire he had built with his own 2 hands. His life's work was crumbling because of his own monumental arrogance. He had committed the one sin a man like him could never afford. He had underestimated his opponent. Miles away in a trendy Soho apartment that now felt like a prison, Ivana Vance was living through her own personal apocalypse. She was huddled on her white boucle sofa, the infamous scarlet dress crumpled in a heap on the floor, like a bloody casualty. Her phone was in her hand, but it was no longer a tool of empowerment. It was an instrument of torture. The internet was a bonfire, and she was the effigy being burned. Memes were already viral, her smug, triumphant face next to her slack-jawed horror. The laugh, her weapon of choice, had been clipped and set to remix videos of spectacular failures. Under every one of her meticulously curated photos, the comments were a tidal wave of vitriol. Gold digger, home wrecker, the face you make when you find out the quiet wife owns the world. Her follower count, the metric by which she measured her entire self-worth, was in free fall. Worse were the emails. The first had arrived at 3 a.m. from a luxury handbag company she represented. "Given the recent events, we have decided to terminate our partnership effective immediately." 4 more had followed from other brands, all with similar sterile wording. She was being dropped. Her carefully constructed brand of aspirational luxury had been instantly tainted by scandal. She was no longer aspirational. She was pathetic. She had tried calling Richard over a dozen times. Each call went straight to voicemail. The man who had whispered promises of yachts and a future in her ear had discarded her without a second thought the moment she became a liability. She finally understood that to him, she was no different from Anya, an asset to be paraded when valuable and discarded when not. She had just been a cheaper, more temporary acquisition. A new wave of shame washed over her, hot and sickening. Her entire strategy had been based on the belief that Anya was a weak, sad, powerless woman. She had aimed her cruelty at what she thought was an easy target, enjoying the thrill of punching down. The realization that she had been mocking a woman who could buy and sell her 1,000 times over, a woman who held the entire board, was a humiliation so profound it left her breathless. She hadn't just lost a sugar daddy. She had made an enemy of a queen, and she had done it on the world's biggest stage. Her career wasn't just over. It was annihilated. At 7:45 a.m., Richard Sterling stood before the mirror in his cavernous walk-in closet. He had showered and shaved, the familiar ritual, a small anchor in the churning sea of his chaos. He straightened the knot of his dark grey tie, his movements stiff and automatic. He was putting on his armor for his final battle. But for the first time, the reflection that stared back at him was not a king, a titan or a conqueror. It was the face of a fool. A man who had held the sun in his hands and in his arrogance had let it go to chase a fleeting sparkler, only to be left in the darkness, burned and alone. He turned from the mirror and walked toward the door, a dead man walking to his own execution. And so the reign of Richard Sterling ended not with a bang, but with the deafening silence that follows a queen's decree. Anya Volkov's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. It's a lesson in the difference between the fleeting flash of arrogance and the enduring strength of integrity. Have you ever seen someone so spectacularly underestimate another person? What do you think? Richard and Ivana's first conversation was like after they both fled the gala. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of sweet, sweet revenge and justice served cold, make sure you hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see a true queen in action. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales of drama and twists that feel like they're ripped straight from real life. Thank you for listening.